We're actually going to run a bit of a double act where I'm going to pose some questions to Matt. I'm Ben Latham. I'm the head of digital strategy at the Summit.
Hi, I'm Matt Roberts, digital marketing controller at Argos. Been there for about 5 years now.
So we've been working together for probably 7 or 8 years, and we've done a number of really interesting things looking at different behaviours around time of day and seasonality, and we wanted to share some of those and really just have a bit of a discussion to share with you some of the insights that we've seen. Before we do, I thought it'd be worth giving just a very brief summary into Summit. So the reason we're really excited about coming here is, you know, the customer is really fundamentally important to us, and understanding more about the customer and their behaviours really helps us to understand how we can help retailers differently. And our purpose is to make it more likely that people will buy from our clients than from anybody else. And we're very focused around retail and retailers and helping them enable their business to make it more likely that customers will shop with them. We focus on 3 core areas: retail consulting, technology and marketing, and we cover off all of those channels there, but we focus on retail, and we're very focused around return on investment and making sure that everything we look at is aligned to customer needs. But I think it would also be quite good for Matt to give a bit of an introduction into how Argos has developed over the last 5 or 6 years, and how they've come to being able to generate £1 billion online in the last fiscal year. So do you want to give a couple of minutes summary in terms of how the evolution of Argos has come about online?
Yeah, so to kind of take it all the way back to Argos is the UK's largest multi-channel retailer, so the largest retailer that has both a store presence and online. This is our 40th anniversary this year, so we've been around for a while. And for us, multi-channel was a real benefit to us and a real advantage that we had, being a very much a traditional catalogue retailer. So online really kind of played to our strengths, particularly with our store portfolio and the way that our stores are set up. So we've had a website now for about 12, 13 years. We were quite early into it, and the check and reserve model that we have, so the in-store collection model, is certainly in the early days was a real key differentiator for us and gave us a real early mover advantage in online. Clearly an awful lot of other retailers now have moved into this model, but it still feels like a very strong benefit for us in the world of online. From a sort of digital marketing perspective, we've been a lot fresher into this. So I think we've been working, as you said, with Summit for about 7 or 8 years. I think the first year our total budget was somewhere in the region of £10,000 for paid search for the entire year. Won't go into too much detail, but it's a bit bigger than that this year, so we've certainly moved on a bit there. From my perspective, I look after the acquisition channels and the retention channels, so I look after paid and natural search, the affiliates and display program, and our email and customer database, our CRM program as well. Just briefly as well, our team, when I started, so I've been with Argos, as I say, 5 years. I was about the 8th person into the whole sort of online marketing and site trading team. Now just digital marketing, which is one function of that. It's a team of 18 in-house, and the agencies that we use probably bring that number up to about 40 or 50 people looking after the digital marketing side of the Argos account. So we've certainly scaled up in the last few years. And I guess finally, if any of you have seen sort of the news and things like that recently, we've had a new MD in place for about 1.5 years now, with a real focus on moving us to become a digital retail leader. So really using our stores as those collection points and getting that sort of web ordering and that, and making Argos much more of an online retailer and taking some of that focus away from catalogue, although not all by any means.
So you talk about stores and web quite synonymously, and you know, I think there's been quite a lot in the press about the direction that Argos are going in. Can you give a bit more of a flavour as to how that's been embraced within the business? Because I think for a lot of retailers there's a real significant challenge around understanding the relationship between stores and how they can embrace the web more.
Absolutely, yeah. So we have a very efficient store model, actually. we hold a lot of stock and we don't put a lot of it out on the shop floors. I guess you guys are all aware. So there's very little shrinkage and it's actually quite a highly efficient model. There's been a lot in the news about Argos closing our stores and things like that. We have a store closure program, but the store closures that we're looking at are only those when they come up to rent review and it's no longer profitable. So actually the number of stores that we're closing on any given year, it hasn't actually changed in quite a while. It is about, as we close some stores, we actually are still opening stores as well. So it's not a fundamental shift from store-based and high street and everything like that to online. It's about making sure that we're really quite focused on what those stores are delivering. And for us, really, that's becoming more and more about an online pickup point with some instant fulfillment options there.
And that's really interesting because I think a lot of stores in other retailers see the web as a real threat to them, whereas what you're saying is actually they're delivering a service to the online customer. And actually that customer is about the efficiencies, and you look at people like Amazon and they're creating the lockers, but actually you've got that competitive advantage already built into your infrastructure.
Absolutely right. So that immediacy of purchase, the fact that you can reserve literally while standing outside a store and have the stock confirmed and reserved in store, so it's real-time reservation, is a key USP that actually I don't think many of our other retailers have got to yet. And similarly, by having nothing on the shop floor, you've got that permanent real-time view of stock availability as well. So you never have that risk of it was on the shop floor 10 minutes ago, but has the last item been purchased by a customer who's walking around the store and I think I've reserved it, but I haven't. So for us, it is still a big USP. And certainly I've been to a number of conferences where you hear about Amazon trying to get into that sort of store-based model, whether that's through lockers or through partnerships with some of the corner shops and places like that. But it feels like that's the last area Amazon are trying to push into. And at the moment, at least, it's certainly a competitive edge that we have at present against the pure plays anyway.
And thinking about the consumer, the customer, again, the high streets typically is looking at their stores to be able to showcase product. And actually that's a really important vehicle for them and for their customers to be able to understand what it is they're seeing, because they want to be able to touch and feel it. And they see that as their competitive advantage, but you don't see that for your customers. And why do you think they're motivated to go to store?
Well, Argos has never had a showcase as a shop floor. It's always been the catalogue's been our showcase. So the showcase for Argos has always been in people's homes. So making that transition from catalogue to digital is actually quite a simple and quite a small step for most consumers. We are still, our object is still to showcase in people's homes. So it really is that the stores are there to really fulfil that need of sort of instant availability. That's really where it kind of comes into its own. It's not really about going into store. Particularly with our breadth of range, one of the reasons for keeping the costs and keeping our cost model very aggressive at a store level is because the staffing levels can be relatively light compared to a traditional retail store. It means that our store staff aren't exactly experts in all their fields. We have quite a broad portfolio. We have typically about 18,000 different products in store, so expecting the staff we have to be experts in any of that is too much to ask. So that's really where the catalogue traditionally has always been there, to try and inform products, to inform customers, sorry. And now as we move online, you get even more opportunity to give even more information to customers through that route anyway.
Okay. So we've actually got a couple of slides looking at some things which I hope will be of interest to you in terms of how we've tried to understand more about the Argos customer, and we're going to just explore a few of those. And I think the first one, looking at how people are consuming Argos in their home, and the migration between catalogue to digital being seamless that you just talked about. Interestingly, Argos does have a fourth channel in the home here, and that is still the catalogue. It's quite difficult to record it, but it's still a very important component in terms of how you look at customers and how they behave. But what's really interesting here is understanding the different behaviour in terms of what people are searching on and what people are purchasing on by device. You can see here that the computer and the desktop is being driven by much more generic terms, much broader terms, whereas the tablet and the mobile device is very specifically aligned around technology, and actually they're much more specific search terms. So How do you look at your multi-channel strategy or multi-device strategy from a consumer perspective, and what does that mean for Argos?
Yeah, so all of our digital marketing channels, we're trying to make sure that they are aligned on the different devices that you're seeing up here, and the weightings that are being reflected. Actually, in terms of mobile and stuff like that, we tend to have a much higher usage of mobile. Our customers seem to use mobile a lot more than we see as an industry standard. So we're making sure that we've got that switch, whether that's making sure that the emails can render correctly on a mobile device. We spent an awful lot of last year working on making sure that our paid search campaigns were broken out by desktop, mobile and tablet. We're now spending a fair part of this year putting them back together again as Google's enhanced campaigns have certainly changed some of the strategies around that, but you know, we have to be flexible with these sorts of things. We definitely see different things in paid search with things like the cost of sale and the average order value varying across these devices. And I think with things like Google's new voice search, we're going to see those sort of search strings, certainly on things like mobile, getting longer and longer, as you can get to a much more refined search very quickly just by speaking into your phone. So we're looking at how we can optimise with those sort of factors as well.
And just in terms of device and pick up in store, do you see big behavioural changes behind devices and their relationship with store?
We see some change, not as much as I think if I'd been kind of asked to give a gut feel how different it would be, but we do see some change. So you definitely see, we can see the time lapse between a reservation being placed and a collection being made. And certainly it's a lot shorter on a mobile than it is on a desktop and tablet. So that kind of does give that indication that people are doing this while they're out and about in the towns. That could mean that they're in other retailers' shops, price matching, and then coming to Argos for a slightly cheaper offer and that guaranteed stock availability. On top of that, we're certainly seeing that at times of day and things like that, different devices are being used in different sorts of ways. So we've seen a lot of that sort of customer usage change as well. Okay,
and from a catalogue perspective, you know, the message has gone out in the press that Argos, I think by 2018, are going to have got rid of all their catalogues and it's going to be a digital world out there. Well, what does that mean, and what's the statement mean that was released?
Yeah, so it's about. Right now, there's still a definite role for a catalogue. So right now, the catalogue's in about 50% of people's homes, and I think any other retailer here would be, you know, they're quite envious stats to have a piece of your brand's material in someone's home, in half of everyone's homes in the UK all through the year is certainly a good place to be. But we know that our print runs are declining because we know how many people are taking up those catalogues and things like that. So we reflect that. For us, the catalogue needs to become a lot more of a signpost to online. So we're starting to look at the page density, the sort of products that we're putting on it, pointing to that showcase of to see a bigger range go online. Already we have far more products available online than we do in the book. So it's about starting to make sure that customers are aware of that choice and that change. And it'll be a phased thing. It's something that we're absolutely testing. So while we've gone out and said that, actually if we find that customers reject that and really still need that catalogue, then we absolutely wouldn't get rid of it. We're just going to see if it moves over time, as we are seeing the big uptake of things like tablet and mobile.
I had a perfect thing happen at Christmas in my house. My mother came in with her Argos catalogue to look with my children about what they might want for Christmas. And my daughter, who's 8 years old, looked through the catalogue, couldn't find what she was looking for, and she went, "No, Granny, have a look on here." She got hold of my iPad, went on to argos.co.uk and showed her exactly what it was that she wanted for Christmas. So very interesting how the younger generation is teaching the older generation how to evolve and how shopping is just actually normal. And that day that we all used to flick through the Argos catalogue dreaming of what we wanted and highlighting, marking down the pages for our parents about what we might want is now actually about how we can do that online and make that easily accessible for our parents to have a look at.
I think there's an interesting thing there as well about the catalogue, and what the catalogue really used to facilitate quite well was that sort of browse journey, the flicking through to try and get some inspiration. Certainly our website, I imagine a few others here, but certainly our website is a very functional website. It's very good at the delivery of if you know what you want, you can get in there, get it, reserve it, and you're done. to try and get inspiration is a lot more of a challenge, and something that we're really looking to address as we move on. So we've got and we've been working quite hard on our iPad. So our iPad app is a lot more inspirational, and that's kind of looking at how we can start getting some of that traditional paper browsing sort of journey and inspiration journey and move that onto online. Okay, thanks.
The next area we were going to just touch on was looking at different buying trends, and I think there's different cycles to look at, not only just in terms of your seasonal cycle across the year, but around day of month. And certainly with Argos, we've seen some real peaks around the end of the month, probably driven by payday. Yeah. Do you look at these and behave differently as a result of understanding that consumer purchase cycle?
Yeah, we certainly look to upweight around about paydays and things like that. Typically our customer base is a slightly lower demographic than a lot of others, and so they're very much more cycled around things like payday. The amount of money they have to spend is less about working on savings and more about as the money comes in, that's when they have the money available to spend. So yeah, we certainly have some strategies about kind of products and kind of marketing messages that we put out around certain periods. On top of that, obviously, you've got things like the bank holidays, the key sort of retail events where you try and spike up your traffic, so bank holidays, Christmas, Easter, etc., etc. We certainly look at upweighting around those dates as well.
Okay. And then also in terms of day of week, so that brings a completely different cycle into play in terms of how consumers are behaving with you. And I think that this shows a very different cycle of behaviour during the week than perhaps most retailers do.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that certainly when you look at when you read industry evidence, you hear a lot about a big spike on a Monday for those sort of home delivery sales and things like that, and that's clearly not something that you're seeing so much here. Wednesdays for us are the day that historically, and even to this day, we do our main email goes out on a Wednesday, so the big sort of blast email that goes to everyone goes out on a Wednesday. It seems to be driving a lot of traffic. Similarly, what you see is if you looked at this split by new customers and repeat customers, that spike on a Wednesday is certainly higher on repeat customers. So there's a bit about conditioning customers about when the deals are coming and things like that, and getting a response there. I think though that the big story is the Saturday in particular, but also the Sunday. So we see a lot around the check and reserve really spikes a lot of our results and changes the kind of overall shape of our business compared to a lot of other people as well. So that idea of someone getting up on a Saturday morning, needing to think of something to do for the day, whether it's going to do a barbecue but don't have one, need something to entertain the kids for the day, and doing that journey earlier in the day, making that purchase so they're actually set and ready to go for the day. So a lot more of that sort of impulse purchase seems to be getting facilitated through our sales.
Okay, and then time of day is another important component, and you can see that there's the conversion rate. There's a more functional behaviour happening at the start of the day than at the end of the day. But I guess what becomes more interesting is when you start to look at that by day of week as well as by time of day, and then you can start to overlay and understand what behavioural changes are happening there. So, you know, this is showing behaviour on a Saturday and Sunday, which is much earlier in the day, and typically that's when other online retailers aren't behaving in that fashion, and actually they've got low sales volume. Is it click and collect that's driving that?
Yeah, certainly what we've attributed it down to. Yeah, it's that drive. You know, we looked at the divide between click and collect and it's home delivery for that, and those peaks much bigger on a weekend. There was also some interesting things when we looked at paid brand terms versus non-brand terms, and understanding that actually that functional behaviour was happening much more earlier in the day from a brand search term, and there was barely any searches happening in an afternoon or evening versus the non-brand search terms, where we saw peaks on a Monday, which is much more in line with other retailers, and actually that peak happening more towards the end of the day. What would you put that down to? I just think it's about the fact that people are that there is such a large degree of that sort of customer base that is that repeat customer that kind of knows Argos and are coming through on those brand terms. Talking about the non-brand terms, there are a couple of quite interesting exceptions as well. So we actually you can see that real dead point between sort of 1 and 5 in the morning there on any given day. It's pretty unsurprising. Actually, we obviously, as I'm sure you're aware, we have quite a large range of categories. When we break it down by category level, if you look at a category like toys, that's actually got quite a big spike early in the morning, and even more so on a mobile device, which really sort of paints a picture of those people that are up looking after their young children in the middle of the night, desperately thinking of something to pass the time away in that 10-20 minute period. And actually, there seems to be a fair few purchases that go through on that toy category. This sort of, I guess, this blind hope that if I actually buy a nice toy, maybe tomorrow they'll sleep through, and that might get a full night's sleep. So there's some interesting anomalies within it, definitely.
You know, we've sort of shown some very sort of top level slides there, but we've drilled down by category. How important has that been in understanding the different consumer behaviour that's being driven through those categories?
From a digital marketing perspective, it's absolutely vital. So how we spend our money on paid search, for example, varies across all the different categories. And so that time of day, certainly as enhanced campaigns has come along, and Google have made it even easier to do sort of time of day purchasing and that sort of geolocation as well. It's becoming more and more important for us to put the money where the customers are searching. So it's making sure that we've got the most coverage when customers are searching on the products that they're looking for as well. So it's become a big focus for us over the last few months.
Okay. We then wanted to just touch on Christmas. Obviously, it's a reasonably significant time for Argos.
Yeah.
We did a piece of work looking at understanding the conversion rate and the customer purchase behaviour over Christmas, to understand that actually Christmas comes earlier than was originally thought from an Argos perspective. So we looked at how we could plan and phase Christmas differently from a budgeting perspective to make sure they capitalise on the customer rather than when they're necessarily their traditional promotional periods were. So that's sort of one of the things that we've looked at with you. But what does Christmas mean for Argos, and why is that important from a customer perspective?
So yeah, Christmas is vital for us. We're very, very heavily skewed towards Christmas as a trading period. Our third quarter, which Christmas sits in, is effectively our make or break. You kind of do your whole year on the back of how strong that performance is. It's been a real shift in how we operate, actually, with some of the insight we've got. We've been traditionally working in a view that says you just keep pushing momentum until you get closer and closer to Christmas. So you get louder and louder, and I'm sure you'll have seen that in press and in TV, that we become more and more prevalent as you get closer to that Christmas day. What we've found from an online perspective is that the spike's a lot earlier. So customers are making that purchase a lot earlier. Now, a lot of that is to do with home delivery. So it's about that. There's an awful lot you hear about Cyber Monday, Cyber Monday. Too many made-up names now, but yep, Cyber Monday. So that first weekend in December, where the payday, that you've had your paycheck for the end of November, so you're kind of the last big injection of cash you've got before Christmas, and you've still got a decent period of time before Christmas, so you know you can make those get those orders for home delivery and still have it delivered to you in a safe period of time without that risk of it not arriving on Christmas Day. So we certainly see that market moves early, but we have to take into account our own sort of unique setup as well. So we do see that spike early in December, but we do also still see a spike towards the very tail end as well, particularly as those sort of pure play retailers sort of drop out of the picture. And even if they do say they can deliver 3-4 days before Christmas, there's a definite degree of suspicion from customers of, will I actually get it? And we start to see a big switch then, and you start to see our home delivery sales start to drop in all but the categories where actually you're not buying for Christmas. So things like furniture stay pretty solid then, because people know that they were never going to get it for Christmas. It's sort of 7 days out. But you see things like toys suddenly make that huge switch and just go absolutely stellar from a check and reserve perspective of that guarantee. Got the present I wanted for my kid.
So consumers, in your eyes, are still very nervous about Christmas delivery, and you've got identified a vehicle to get around that.
Yeah, we push very hard. I think we're not too, some of our store colleagues might have a different opinion, but I think we stay open until between 6 and 8 and Christmas Eve. So they push quite hard on this one, but it does give us that opportunity, all those people that work all the way through till Christmas Eve, still being able to get something that they actually wanted. And actually, we put a lot of focus on the fact that through Check and Reserve, you kind of guaranteed the product that you wanted, so you don't have that frantic running around a lot of stores desperately trying to find that one item. So it becomes a big focus for us in that last week.
I'm sure your store staff love you. Well, one question I've got actually, which has just made me think really is, it's slightly aside, but it is around seasonality and behaviour, is that retailers staff up on a weekend for their big sales period. Online, everybody goes home and they go, well, just leave the web to do what it does. How do you think that's going to change? Do you think that's going to change, and how important is that? Because actually, the biggest trading days, as we've seen for Argos, are on a Saturday and Sunday. Yep. But there's nobody in to have any impact or influence on what's going on.
It's I think it's going to become more of a challenge as things move on. Everyone talks about internet being 24/7. But you're absolutely right. Most retailers operate an internet team that are Mondays to Fridays, 9 to 5, for example. So I imagine, like everyone else, you have a team that are in to make sure the site stays up, and if the site actually goes down over the weekend, there's people to bring it back up. But to actually trade the site, I think you've got two options. You've either got to move into more automation, trusting the systems that you've got to allow you to trade effectively over the weekend, or you start looking at getting some human people in to make those decisions through the Saturdays and Sundays. I think it's going to be an interesting dynamic going forward.
Okay. We've only got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to whiz through some of these. One of the other things we've looked at is time to buy. I think it's really interesting understanding the different behaviours around from when somebody starts searching and when they convert online, and that consideration period for a customer. So, understanding whether it's a quick purchase or a really considered purchase is important. And how do you, we've done this, and actually if you look at it for toys, for example, it's an extremely different picture. Only 30% of people make the purchase on the first day of looking versus the average of 60 or 70%. We've also looked at that across different marketing channels. So affiliates, it's more like 90% of people versus purchase on the first day. From a paid search perspective, it's 40%. So consumers are being driven by different channels and by different categories. Their behaviour is very different. How big a challenge is that for you?
It certainly puts a challenge on how we allocate our marketing spend and how we report on our marketing numbers. So we look at both time of sale and time of click, because I think it's quite important to not put everything down to that final part of sale, because there's been an awful lot that might well have gone into that journey beforehand. So an awful lot, we've been working with Summit on attribution modelling to try and get a much better idea of how the whole purchase journey's worked. Similarly, seeing it on different categories means that you can operate in sort of very different ways as well. So you can change your spend depending on whether or not it is very much a last-minute purchase or a bit more considered. As you say, toys actually having a longer consideration cycle than a lot of our kind of standard categories. We've got a few views for that. One is that sort of searching around to make sure you're getting absolutely the right product. I also think that there's a lot in toys, which is it's very much a utility category. Everyone has the same Lego range or the same Transformers or things like that. There's a few exclusives in retailers, but typically the really hot products. Last Christmas, Furby was the hot product. Every retailer ranged Furbies. So what you'll get customers checking Argos to see the price of a Furby, leaving, going to Amazon, going to Tesco's, going to Smith's, coming back, and it means that we've certainly seen over the last few years customers are becoming far more price sensitive. So on those more sort of utility ranges where it's the same product in every kind of retailer, that you'll see a lot more of that longer purchase time as customers search around for the best deal.
You just touched on attribution. Mm-hmm. Can we just spend a second talking about that? Why is that important from a consumer behaviour and understanding perspective? What is it that you wanted to get out of of understanding attribution differently?
So working on attribution, we've looked at a couple of things. So typically we look at that sort of last click wins model. So whichever channel has been that final channel gets the sale, which has skewed it in certain ways. So people like the cashback sites and the voucher sites always look very strong on this, because typically as a customer, it's the last thing you do. You've made your reservation, or sorry, you've made your decision. You then think, right, now's the time. Let's see if I can get 10% off it through some code sites, or I'll go on to Quidco and get my 2% or 5% or 10% cashback on it. So how much, they're certainly there in the conversion part of the sale, but how much are they initiating the sale is a much bigger question. We've had a lot of feedback from sort of the content affiliates and stuff that talk about the fact that they put all the effort in and don't get a lot out at the end. So being able to look at things like that on affiliates and to understand how all the different parts of the digital marketing mix make up a customer's purchase, it's a really important piece for us. I guess the second part as well is you can then look at it within channel. So something like paid search, you can start looking at, rather than just that final term that kind of got the sale off the end of it, how many other times were they searching on Google and how much refinement did they go through? So if a customer came in and purchased at the end on a Sony KDL 40 TV, that would get all the sales. So we'd start looking at optimizing our campaigns around that word. But did that customer beforehand look at Sony TV, and before that look at large TVs, and before that look at TVs? And if we weren't in any of those journeys, then how do we make sure we're in at the end? So typically you wouldn't get a great conversion off the term bed or a great conversion off the term TV because you're kind of not ready yet to purchase. You haven't got to that point in your mind. But we absolutely think it's essential that you need to be in that consideration set at that stage. So even though it's not delivering the money up front, we actually think over the course of an attributed sale, it would certainly play an important part in it.
And do you think that your behaviour around those terms need to change as well? So if somebody's in a consideration phase as opposed to a purchase mode, if they're in a purchase mode, they might want to land on a specific product page.
Yeah.
Whereas if they're researching beds, actually, surely it's more about information. And how are you going to provide that information to them so that you remain part of that consideration set as you go through?
So it's a lot about the landing pages on the site and things like that. So as you say, if you're down to a product-specific search, then absolutely you should be landing them on that product detail page. But actually when you're further up, people are looking for the term beds or TVs, then you should be at that whole category page that talks about buying guides, information about TVs, the brands that we offer, all that sort of stuff as well.
Okay, thanks. So another really interesting area we've looked at is trying to understand customers and what they're doing when they come through on a paid search term. So down the left is the category that a user came through from a paid search perspective, and across the top is what category they actually ended up purchasing. And what we found is customers don't behave as you'd expect them to, where actually in no single category did 50% of customers purchase within the category that they originally came from. So I guess when planning marketing campaigns and trying to entice people to drive traffic to buy certain products, this actually sheds a completely different perspective on how you might organise your campaigns. Well, what have you done, having seen this, to change how you're behaving?
It was a real eye-opener when this came through to us, and a real challenge for us going forward as well, because if you're going to, for example, do your paid search based on things like return on investment, if you're a very broad church of a retailer like we are, where we sell from a huge range of products, it means that the margin that you're working to varies so significantly on categories. Technology is a very different margin to jewellery or to furniture. So you can start building your spend models based on the margin that each product category delivers. And if you think that you're operating at a certain margin on beds, you can then push all your spend on paid search on beds up a lot higher to be far more aggressive. If then the customer ends up buying a Nintendo Wii, for example, you might find that you've actually spent all the margin on that product because you've set it so they've come in on beds and purchased a Wii in the end. So it's about being really careful, and it's a challenge versus the specialists. So if you are Dreams or DFS or someone like that, and your entire category is very high margin furniture, you can afford to invest very aggressively on paid search because you know it's still what the kind of percentage return you're going to be getting off that. if we go head to head with Dreams on beds on paid search and someone buys a Wii, that's really bad news for us. There is the flip, because it does mean also that actually if someone's come in on a Wii term and bought a bed, which is slightly less frequent, I guess, but it's certainly, you know, it's a margin upside for us as well, and it does mean that against some of the kind of tech pure plays, it means that you can afford to be a little bit more aggressive because you can mix the margin up slightly higher on some of our other categories as well.
My favourite was understanding the amount of people who went in and searched for a lawnmower and ended up buying a Hoover. I wondered whether they were just slightly confused in terms of what they were searching for. The last area we really wanted to look at was seasonality in terms of weather. So we've been doing some work with Argos looking at aligning weather with purchase behaviour and the purchase cycle of product. And obviously Argos has some very seasonal products where there is some really strong correlation in looking at temperature and how that relates to purchase and volume of purchase. So it'd be good to just touch on how you're taking weather in as a feed and what that means and how you're dealing with that from a customer behaviour and what some of those trigger points are.
So, well, I talked about some of the challenges within paid search about having that very broad product range. Within things like weather, it actually becomes a real strength for us because we've always got something that people want depending on the weather. Again, if you're an electrical pure play, if it's all you do is electrical and it's a really hot day, well, with the exception of things like fans, you kind of no one really wants to buy TVs. Similarly, if all you do is outdoor furniture and it's absolutely peeing it down outside, you're going to struggle to sell it. So the good thing for us is that we sell both, so we can kind of operate on both sort of seasonal elements. We've done a lot of work over the last sort of 5 or 6 years on certain, literally within a degree, you can see certain product categories start to really spike going upwards. So there's a temperature that we get to where you suddenly see garden furniture and barbecues and things like that. The sales really start to rocket. Another sort of 5, 6, 7 degrees higher and paddling pools and fans start to really go. So we get to the point now where we know exactly sort of when the countries at a certain temperature, when fans, it's almost like flicking a switch. So it's about making sure that we're ready for when that happens. One of the disadvantages of living in the UK is that the weather's never that predictable. So you can have the plans. When you actually need to switch them on is where the real challenge is. Because again, if you're even out by that sort of 1 degree, that can make a massive difference in sales of fans. We can do 100,000 fans in a day if the temperature's at the right sort of level. So we can do some really big numbers. But you've just got to make sure that you've got your timings right on that one.
And how do you plan for that? Because that must be an infrastructure nightmare. And you know, from a marketing perspective, being able to turn campaigns on and off as quickly as that must be quite a challenge coordinating the whole business to be able to react. Yeah,
I actually think we're in a better place than the supply chain guys. They have a much tougher job because they've got to get the stock out into the stores because often that hot spell could be 1 day. So it's about making sure it's in store when it's needed. So that's where the real challenge is about how much stock do you put into those stores and how long do you hold it there. From a marketing perspective, things like email, you can do most of the creative beforehand. Things like paid search, we can have the plans in place about what to dial up and when. And all of that kind of works in very close to real time. So that's considerably less of a challenge for us. One of the things that we have done as well, so last year and the year before when we had the snow, our check and reserve says that you need to collect within about, it's the day after, so it's up to kind of, well, from as little as 24 hours up to sort of 47 hours, and we extended collection by an extra day to give people the chance to go and collect. And that really worked, particularly on things like sledges. So again, we sold some really serious quantities of sledges because, again, people could actually make that trudge to a store and actually know that they were getting the sledge when they got there. So that worked really well for us.
Those are all things that you sort of plan for because you know at some point there's going to be snow and it's some point you know it's going to be hot or you hope it's going to be hot. Yeah. I guess there's other peaks around weather that you can't plan for. And do you have a different strategy around that sort of disaster component that you might focus on?
When things like the floods and things like that, we sell a lot of play sand actually. So as a retailer, all through the year, it sells both during the summer and actually through the winter as well, for a variety of reasons. When the floods came, we sold an awful lot of play sand. People were, I think, just trying to make their own sandbags for their houses and stuff. It's about how quickly can you react? So our email system is very responsive. We can drop product in real time and then just push emails out. We have a very big customer database through the email side, so we can get to a lot of people. We know locations of where they live, so we can cross-reference that with sort of flood data and things like that. And similarly on paid search, using the new sort of geolocation and stuff like that, you can turn things up and down based on where they are. Similarly, you know that if there is a flood going on, then sales in that store aren't going to be great. Even more so, we will work with store ops to find when stores are shut for both snow and floods and things like that, and really try and dampen down as much of the spend as we can across all our channels, because you're just wasting money at that stage.
I've got a couple more questions for you before we finish. One is actually part of your new vision is actually moving away from product focus and looking more towards customer focus. Mm-hmm. What does that really mean from an Argos perspective, and so obviously for the audience here around consumer behaviour? What is it that you're going to do differently by looking at that perspective?
So from a digital perspective, we've always been quite lucky. We've held quite a lot of customer data in quite a robust database. That means we can interrogate it in quite a lot of ways. One of the big challenges for the business now is how do we get that data from a purely online perspective out to the rest of the business? It's readily available, but we have a big blind spot, which is customers that go into store, purchase in store and leave again. We really don't know who they are. So we don't know if that's the first time a customer's been in, or if they've our most regular online customer that just on this one occasion happened to pop in and make the purchase. So we're looking at how do we plug that gap without getting too intrusive into the customer journey. But it's absolutely about starting to look at how you segment the customers to get into groups that are about what the customer really responds to and what they're really into, rather than just screaming at everyone that we've got a really good deal on a telly, or it's a half price exercise bike this week. It's starting to understand what customers, looking at their browse data and their purchase and their interest data, and starting to see that these kind of people are into keeping fit, and so we can speak to them in a very different way, and then finding the customers that look very similar to that but aren't quite doing the same thing, and how do you start migrating those across? And that becomes a big challenge for us online, and then getting that data and kind of organising the entire plan around it for the rest of marketing, and ultimately using that data to change some of our purchasing decisions. So what are the kind of products we're going out for? Do we have a really high affluent market that we could start really speaking to some of the real tier one brands about getting some of the product in to support those guys? And similarly, because we have a very strong own brand range, we can actually build product bespoke to what the customers are kind of looking for and what fits them best. Okay,
and I've got one last question to finish on. Mm-hmm. You talked about a single view of the customer. Mm-hmm. If you could get any single piece of information about your customer, what piece of information would you get and why?
For us, it's all about kind of joining up the whole piece. So we get our view of customers grows the longer they're with us. So it'd be really good to get that much broader view of everything. I think certainly things like what their behaviour is like on Facebook, where a lot of that is shielded away from you and stuff, and getting past sort of where Google have the no referrals codes and things like that. All of that stuff would be really interesting. And clearly it's a pipe dream, it's never going to happen. So it's about doing it yourself and finding as much information as you can. So that's really what we're working on.
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.